If you'd never lived in America and you watched our cities convulsed all summer by riots attached to Black Lives Matter demonstrations, you'd have to conclude that the United States is a seething cauldron of racial bigotry. But if you'd lived here all your life and seen as many nasty election cycles as I have, you might well draw a different conclusion. As our new press secretary would say, I'll circle back to this. But let's start by acknowledging that racism does exist on some level in America, and look at what we can do to end it once and for all. Step 1. Understand it. Humans evolved on this planet in small tribal groups. We were hunter-gatherers for thousands of generations. We developed a natural wariness of other tribal groups who were noticeably different from ours. This was Survival 101. If we crested a hill and saw an unfamiliar group of humans gathered on the other side, we would be stupid to assume that they were friendly. In the wild, prudence demands suspicion. If they were roasting a human carcass over a fire, we knew they were dangerous and made plans to kill them before they could kill us. But if they seemed to be much like us, we reached out, made friends, and formed alliances. Prejudice is a survival instinct, and it has no necessary connection to color. This is what social scientists call otherism. Racism is just otherism that coincides with color. In the U.S., this has to do with the historic fact that slavery on this continent also coincided with color. It doesn't always. The misconception that white people are superior still lingers in the minds of some people. This is now matched by an equally misconceived notion that because of long ago slavery, white people are inferior, at least morally. But the method for replacing prejudice with mutual respect is as it has always been, shared experience, leading to shared values and a shared way of life. This brings us to step 2. One culture for all. There's been an idea in this country for several decades now. The idea is that African Americans should have their own culture, a black culture. And much has been done to encourage and create this separate culture. If ending racism is your goal, this is just about the worst possible strategy. As our primitive ancestors just demonstrated, it's a pronounced cultural division that creates the otherism that we call racism. Point to any of the places in America where racism is not a factor, and you will see that a culture is being shared. The worlds of music, sports, and the military come to mind. These are the places where hard work and a well-defined set of rules apply in a strict meritocracy. Hang out backstage at a jazz festival if you ever get the chance. You'll hear white musicians speaking reverently about black jazz legends. You'll also hear black musicians gushing over white jazz legends. Jazz is not just music, it's a culture. Playing jazz requires discipline and hard work. The mastery attained by each individual gives them well-earned self-respect, and knowing that their fellows have done the same creates a mutual respect. Something as insignificant as skin color has no chance whatsoever of canceling the commonality. This holds true everywhere that people of all races mix for a common purpose. If that purpose is challenging enough, all involved will depend on each other. The slackers will be weeded out or forced to grow up, and a common way of life will develop. Race will not be an issue. Interaction is key, lots of it. And that leads us to step 3. Become color neutral. I ignore race as much as possible. We used to talk about being colorblind, but I avoid that term these days. Blacks and whites look different, so a visual metaphor like colorblind can sound disingenuous. I'm not blind to color. I'm indifferent to color. I'm color neutral. This, I think, is the state of mind necessary for a post-racial America. One should focus on the meaningful particulars of another person, not on his or her superficial characteristics. I simply don't care what color you are. I care what kind of person you are. If you're a good, hardworking dude and your skin is as dark as mine is light, I will prefer you to an inconsiderate slacker whose skin matches mine. 10 times out of 10, no exceptions. But if you're an inconsiderate slacker with dark skin, I will reject you 10 times out of 10. My opinion of you as a person has nothing to do with your color. It neither handicaps you or advantages you, in my eyes. But sometimes we have to address this visual disparity. Not long ago at a tourist attraction, I was asked to take a picture of a group of children and their teacher. They lined up and smiled, but I saw that a little girl with dark skin was in shadow. I knew that when the picture was posted, her features would not be visible. So I said to her, "Honey, let's get you over here into the sunshine." She moved, the sun found her features, and I snapped the picture. I acknowledged that light reflects differently from dark skin than from light skin, and I compensated for that. Just as I would have put a taller kid toward the rear, not colorblind, color indifferent, but not indifferent to the downside of either color in a given situation. If there'd been a ginger kid squinting into the direct sun, I'd have moved him to the shady spot. We should just be matter of fact about skin color. Tiptoeing around it gives the impression that it's something we can't discuss. That is exactly the wrong approach. Friends who respect each other are the first to acknowledge their differences. Why wouldn't they? Unless a difference is something to be ashamed of or embarrassed by. I am aware, however, that Black Americans are always being told that a lot of white people are secretly racist. So in my richly integrated town, I am just slightly kinder to Black people than to white people. But only slightly. I'm a bit more likely to call a Black man sir. I'm a bit more likely to compliment a Black woman on her appearance, particularly when she's just had her hair done. But never do I allow myself more than a sliver of overcompensation. One should never pander. Step 4, opportunity and work. In late September of 2017, I drove east on Superior Avenue through parts of Cleveland, from Edgewater Park to the Cleveland Clinic. Much of the way, I drove through predominantly African-American neighborhoods. At first, I saw a lot of idle people hanging around on street corners. I didn't feel secure in those areas. As I worked my way east, things became busier and more prosperous, and I felt perfectly safe. But the color of the people had not changed at all. When people are engaged in productive, self-supporting activities, they are at their best. This is not a Black thing or a white thing. This is a human thing. Doing needed work well has never not been rewarding in the human tribe. As your self-esteem rises, so do you rise in the esteem of others. This feels good and gives you something to lose, and also something to build upon. People with skin in the game tend not to steal cars. We must always be striving for full employment for all without reference to color. But of course, wherever people who don't share a skin color do share meaningful work, they see one another as teammates and colleagues with a shared purpose. Silly barriers like race dissolve into thin air, and a shared culture of accomplishment and stability takes over. But in order to achieve that in this modern economy, everybody is going to have to be functioning at the top of their ability. This brings us to step 5, education. Public school test scores in this country have been flatlined since 1970. The blue line going upward is overall costs. The ones stagnating at the bottom are math, reading, and science. Obviously, we have some very good schools producing college-bound kids sure to succeed. But in the inner cities where Black kids have politicians who look like them, they also have schools that never stop failing them. One of the reasons is a lack of discipline in those schools, and it's just getting worse. In 2019, Gavin Newsom signed California Senate Bill 419. The law has now taken yet another layer of discipline from our schools. Kids now will not face suspension for blatantly defying their teacher. Why? For the same reason that all the other layers of discipline have been removed, because Black kids were being suspended more often than white kids. Is racial discrimination the problem? In schools controlled at every level by liberals? I'd say that at a time when fathers are rare in the home and violent rap music is everywhere, it would be surprising if Black kids didn't defy authority. But the fear of being called racist is very powerful. That can end your career. So those in charge of the school simply remove penalties for acting out. The lowering of behavioral standards has, of course, been matched by a drop in standards of performance. How could it not? This has led to kids being sent into the world with a subpar education. The brightest among them are snatched up by colleges eager to prove how not racist they are. But even those kids are often not as prepared as white kids and Asian kids coming in from intact families and better school districts. This creates the high percentage of college dropouts among young Blacks. Last fall, after 6 months of COVID shutdowns, LA Unified's teachers union said, among other things, that their members wouldn't go back to school unless there was a moratorium on charter schools. I'll give charter schools their own video. But first understand that Democrat politicians are in hock to the teachers' unions. Here are the top contributors. Why do unions always line up against these tough little schools that stress discipline and parental involvement? Easy. Charter schools are non-union. So why do Democrat politicians consistently oppose them? I think we've already done the math on that. Not every charter is great, but they outperform standard public schools more often than not. Charter schools add layers of discipline. They produce students with self-control who can compete in college. You probably noticed that in spite of their opposition to Bill 419, the charter schools of California are also now forbidden to suspend by law. It's a dizzying cycle. Subpar education breeds lack of opportunity and lower levels of success. Add to that the resentments and misunderstandings that spring from parallel cultures that don't understand each other, and you have the racial tensions that should have faded out long ago. All of this must be addressed with common sense solutions, all at once, by all of us, or we will never attain Dr. King's vision. And that brings us to step 6, deactivate the activists. 6 months ago, 3 former presidents, the Speaker of the House, and many others gathered to eulogize John Lewis. Barack Obama spoke at length about the man's fight for equality in the Jim Crow South, how courageous he was in that very real struggle over half a century ago. I had just driven from Portland, perhaps the most liberal city in the country, where I surveyed the appalling damage done to its downtown by protesters supposedly livid about racism in America. Those riots continued for several more months after John Lewis's funeral, and the rioters were mostly white middle-class kids. What's really going on here? We recently observed the holiday that honors a great man, Martin Luther King Jr. That got me to thinking, are there any heroes on the left who are not activists? It's hard to think of one, isn't it? From Harriet Tubman to Susan B. Anthony to Joe Hill to Rosa Parks to Cesar Chavez to John Lewis to Barack Obama. Obama spoke eloquently about the March on Selma 56 years ago. And true to the expectations of his audience, Obama could not resist firing up racial tensions. He spoke for 40 minutes. Here's just 1 minute.
Bull Connor may be gone, but today we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of Black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
I hate to remind him that Bull Connor and George Wallace were both Democrats, and that the same virus that made voting by mail necessary was at its peak when powerful Democrats encouraged the tightly packed George Floyd protests. But I have to call him out on the BS about polling places closing to suppress the black vote. That is a dishonest and manipulative narrative designed to make Black Americans feel frightened and aggrieved. For several years, many states have been moving from precinct polls to vote centers, mostly to save money and solve staffing issues. The next county over from me, Ventura, has virtually no black people, but they reduced polling places last year from 389 to just 48. Deep blue Los Angeles County closed 3,000 polling places, leaving only about 1,000 vote centers. My own polling place was closed down in November. The former president knows how to pull a standing ovation at a funeral, but his audience seems to be applauding bad news, don't they? I wonder what my black neighbors who watched that speech thought when our beloved polling place closed in the fall. If all of your heroes are known for fighting injustice, emulating those heroes requires finding an injustice to fight. And there is simply not enough real racism left in America to satisfy the armies of would-be activists pouring out of the colleges every year. The people applauding Obama as they mourn John Lewis don't want the struggle to end. They see it as their ennobling quest. What becomes of them if they admit that unfortunate events like those that befell both Michael Brown and George Floyd have to do with criminality and the otherism that they themselves create by portraying white police officers as racists out to murder Black Americans? It's simply immoral to exaggerate the impact of racism. Even if it were true, convincing a young person that he or she will have to struggle uphill for a lifetime would be a sin. How much worse is it to do that when the only racists left are ignorant throwbacks unable to stop anybody's progress? So there are my 6 steps. Understand racism, unite the culture, become color neutral, focus on employment, fix education, and deactivate the activists. Thanks for letting me get this off my chest. I hope my thinking resonates with you and that you'll pass this video on to a friend. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.